Good afternoon, everyone. It's Tom Klein. Welcome to Stop Everyone from Reaching into Your Pocket and Keep the Money You Make. Looking forward to doing this with you. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. The Q&A button is available. I'll do my best to answer your questions as we go instead of waiting till the end. So if you do have questions and what I'm talking about, it's usually better to talk about it in context. So good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast. Good morning to everyone else, and let's get going. First 60 seconds about me. I'm a third-generation car guy. I was a dealership owner for more than 30 years. My family's been in the car business since 1925, so almost 100 years. This is one of the relics of days past, an ashtray. You may recognize it. With courtesy and fairness was our thing and how we conducted business. So that's a little bit about my background. So risk mitigation. Risk mitigation requires continuous improvement activity. So part of risk mitigation is making sure that you are looking for problems. That sounds counterintuitive, but it's important to try to unearth them, because when you find those problems and have identified them, then you can begin to put together a program to fix them or prevent them. Better to prevent them, but often we're fixing it. So once you've unearthed the problems, you need to create and maintain a compliance management system and a system of risk transference. Compliance management system is making sure you're keeping track of all of your customer concerns, both what they wrote in or what they said or how they reviewed you, and then how you resolved it. If any regulators ever come in to your business, they'll want to see how you're handling complaints. And so you, even if it's something as simple as a 3-ring binder, it's important to do. There are plenty of good software programs out there that will help you track this, but that's part of it. And then risk transference, we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But in short, risk transference is how are you going to make sure that these problems get handled in a timely manner, because in risk, handling problems when they're small always equates to making sure that the least amount of money is spent in getting those problems resolved. And then establishing best practices. And this is the continuous improvement activity of risk mitigation. Risk is a continual process. Each item, you're going to assess the risk, determine what the appetite for your department or your dealership is. In other words, what are you willing to take on? Are you willing to have someone leave upset, and they might go to a regulator, they might go to a lawyer, they might go to the Better Business Bureau? Is that a risk you're willing to take? And then is there a way to transfer the risk? Is there a way for you to resolve that risk? And then what's the residual risk? So this is a continuous process that we talk about, not only from a macro level, but also from a micro level. The overall philosophy of risk mitigation is here, and we're going to talk about this slide now, and we're going to talk about it at the end, which is you want to remediate and correct any problems, document and report and evaluate and revise. So depending on what the nature of the problem is, and depending on who should know about it, if it's a procedure, you want to remediate it, you want to remediate the problem, correct the procedure so that next time it might not happen. You want to document what happened and report it, perhaps to the dealer, perhaps to the general manager, depending on how you're set up, and then evaluate and revise and see if there's anything else you need to do going forward. This slide is missing. What this slide says is, how can you booby trap so that problems will run to you so that you don't have to find them? If you can find a way to make sure that the problems come to you, then you'll be able to resolve them earlier. There it is. Okay, a quick case study. Your customer who just bought a vehicle is likely drunk and wants to take delivery. So what do you do about that? So a lot of people first say, well, you call the police. One thing about risk is you want to make sure that the problem you have, you don't turn it into a bigger problem. So if you call the police, the customer gets dragged away, maybe he sues you for malicious prosecution. It becomes a big problem. Then he wants to argue not only about the police, but he also wants to argue about the vehicle. So what do you do when he's drunk and wants to take delivery? Here are the problems that you would face in this particular case. If he takes delivery when he's drunk, is the sale enforceable? Can you give him the vehicle? You know he's drunk, so you really can't. And if you tell him, no, you're not going to be able to get the vehicle and we're not going to give it to you, he gets upset and then he storms out and you potentially have a problem there. If you give him the vehicle, you open yourself up to liability, which is called negligent entrustment, which means you shouldn't have given him the vehicle, because a vehicle can be a weapon, right? It can go out and hurt people. And if you knowingly give him the vehicle, then you're opening yourself up to some liability. So what do you do in this particular case? You call Thor, and Thor would tell you that if your vehicle, that your customer is drunk, that the best solution that I've come up with, and I had a dealer call me with this specific problem, is you have the salesman drive him home and pick him up in the morning. And the rationale that you give is to see if the dealership can give him more money for his trade-in. And then you give him another $100 for his trade-in, right? So in this particular case, you're making sure that you don't upset the customer. You're making sure you don't give the customer the vehicle when he can go out and hurt somebody, and you're not upsetting him for any reason. So this is an example where you want to really think through how you handle it before you would just call the police or tell him he can't take it, or really be confrontational with him. So when you talk about risk mitigation, you also talk about governance. And I like to think of this as the 3 legs of a stool. And the first leg of the stool is consumer and employee dispute resolution. So what policies can you put in place to make sure that you're resolving your customer problems? For example, one I see all the time is when a dealership will put up a response to a review, and the response will say, "Thank you for coming into ABC Motors. We're sorry you're upset. Please contact us and we'll be happy to help you." Well, my thinking on that is usually most people post their reviews with their names. Why should they have to call you to resolve their problem? You know their name, you have their information, reach out to them, resolve the problem, get them back to the store if necessary, resolve the problem, and then ask them to update their review. Employee disputes, much the same. Do you have a methodology at your store where you're kind of pushing the employees to go a certain direction if they have a dispute or a problem? Every employee should know where they should go with their problem. The second leg of the stool for risk mitigation is compliance, and we're going to talk about that. And then the third is risk transference. So risk at the dealership, I always say, starts on 2 legs. In this case, socks. But the 2 legs, because most problems start at the dealership with either customers or employees. So if you're handling those problems, you're going to be handling 70% or 60% or 80%, but a very high percentage of the problems. So ask yourself, and we're going to talk about some of this right now, what can you do to make sure those problems get resolved quickly? We already talked about making sure all the internet reviews get handled. And we're going to talk about that a little more right now. Here is a list, and I'm happy to send everybody this deck after the webinar. If you'd like, just reach out and I'll give you my contact information. I suggest that everyone use and go to these websites on a daily basis. You'll see there are 8 Google, Facebook, Yelp, Reputation.com, Piss Consumer, My 3 Cents, Rip Off Report, and DealerRater. You should have somebody go on every day and make sure that there are no bad reviews. If there are bad reviews, something short and sincere, not the same thing over and over. Don't say the same words over and over. If somebody says they're upset, acknowledge that they're upset, and then tell them you're going to reach out. These other ones I suggest you at least look at monthly so that you're watching what your customers are doing. I've told the story before that there's class action lawsuits happen all the time. And I know of one locally that happened with 2 ladies in a church who were complaining about the car dealership that had taken advantage of them. And that resulted in close to $7 or $8 million that the dealership had to pay for that particular class action. So something very simple you can do is take a look at these websites on a daily and monthly basis, troll them if you will, find those bad reviews, get those customers back in and get them resolved. This very much is a you manage what you monitor issue. If you are monitoring these reviews, then you're managing them. Likewise, I didn't mention on the last slide, but Glassdoor is a really important one. If you don't know about Glassdoor.com, Glassdoor is a website where employees are encouraged to go rate their employer. So you may have employees who are upset with you and posting on Glassdoor. Obviously, that's something you want to handle very promptly, but this is very important to take a look at this. So when you get to customer complaints, the first thing I hear all the time at dealerships, and I've been recently in Boston and New York, and I hear this all the time, is we did nothing wrong. We didn't, it's the customer's expectation that are outside. We really didn't do anything wrong. And I'm going to proffer to you today, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. If the customer's upset, you're going to have to make sure that they get straight. Otherwise, you run the risk of them filing lawsuits, going to the FTC, going to the attorneys general, going to politicians. Politicians will go to motor vehicle dealer boards, and then you have a bigger mess on your hand. So get these items resolved. Don't get caught in the trap of we did nothing wrong. Get the customers fixed, get them handled, and keep moving. These reviews, because I've been in dealerships, oftentimes people take these reviews and they say, oh, the customer doesn't know what they're saying and they don't understand how it works and that kind of thing. Listen to these reviews. It's a very good way to get feedback on your employees. If you have an employee who continually comes up bad in these reviews, use this in your operation to train them, correct them, and get rid of them if necessary, if they're not going to follow what your policies and procedures are. So listen to these reviews, listen to the complaints, and use the feedback for the operations of your business. Fixing these problems is money in the bank. It's kind of a twofer, because not only will you get happier customers who will come back and buy cars from you, but you're also preventing problems, right? That's risk mitigation. You're preventing problems. And in my years when we had the dealerships, I had customers who had big problems. I fixed their problem. Then they subsequently, in the the 25 years that came, they bought 4 and 5 and 6 cars from me. So this really is a good practice to get into, and something that I'll advocate with you. So on risk transference, how can you take whatever risk you have, whatever keeps you up at night, whatever worries you? What happens if you have that problem? What will you do? Do you have a procedure in place, or do you have an insurance policy in place that might respond to it? So we're going to talk about that right now. Do business owners understand their insurance policies? October 2021 data from a company called Broker indicated only 22% of small and medium enterprise business owners read their insurance policies. 56% admit to not knowing the exact cost of their insurance. 20% admit to not knowing how the insurance purchases are even handled, and 30% allow it to automatically renew without making any changes. Folks, today I would encourage you to start today to start digging into your insurance policies, because when you understand your insurance policy, you'll begin to understand how to handle some problems. Further, 57% of business leaders and tech founders haven't fully read their insurance policies. So it's very important for you to know what's there. And I'm going to go into an example here in a minute about one example of how knowing what's in a policy will help. One dealer I know said to me, I wish there was an insurance buffet where you could get everything covered. Unfortunately, there is not an insurance buffet. That's why it's important to know what your exclusions are. Maybe today, this afternoon, take however many policies you have and just read the exclusions. That's where I encourage you to start, because, for example, on your dealer's open lot policy, do you have spot disclosure coverage? So if in most states, spot disclosure is still legal. If the customer goes out and gets in an accident 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 days afterwards, do you have coverage? There are a lot of policies that A, have no spot coverage, or B, sometimes they'll limit it to 5 days. Maybe that's something you want to negotiate. Maybe you just took a loss on something like that. So once you've identified your problems, you can start to negotiate with the insurance companies on getting those things covered. So let's go right into another case study. The DMV investigator arrives at your store to arrest you and you don't know why. This is a story from one of my clients who hired me to help them. So this really happened. So here are the facts. The dealer buys a truck from a guy named Zach. The dealer writes a check for $26,500 to Zach. The investigator then tells you and says that there was a warrant initiated by the father, who is also on the title, which was discovered after the sale. So Zach ended up forging the father's name so that he could sell the vehicle to get the $26,500. So the DMV investigator says that the dealer doesn't pay the father the $26,500, he's going to be arrested. What do you do? So here's what I do. I read the dealer's insurance policy and pulled out the physical damage and looked at what's called the false pretense and government confiscation part of the policy. Under the physical damage coverage B, it says it's changed as follows. And then sub B, little b, says, you're acquiring an auto from a seller who did not have legal title. So in this case, the son did not have the legal title to sell it and did it without the father's knowledge or his authorization or his blessing. So here's how we resolve this. This is the claim that we submitted in its entirety. It says policy number at the top, false pretense claim with the VIN number. We acquired an auto from a seller who did not have legal title, right off of the little b. You're acquiring an auto from a seller who did not have legal title. Zachary T. represented, he was the sole owner. Merle was on the title as well. The truck was parked on our lot. So the way, without going into a whole long story, I was able to talk to the DMV investigator, talk to the Commonwealth attorney. This happened in Virginia. Turn the claim into the insurance. We talked to the father. We negotiated the father down from $26,500 down to $18,000 in exchange for dropping the charges. We were able to leverage the insurance company to pay that $18,000. That took some time, but we got them to pay. And in the end, because this was during COVID, the dealer ended up making more money on the truck because the truck sat there. We had to get the truck back. The dealer had sold the truck. We had to get the truck back. And I encouraged the dealer to park it on their lot. The dealer paid nothing because I got my fees included and had the insurance company pay my fees. The dealer avoided arrest, but by approaching the insurance company, we got all that handled. And then we found out that the title clerk had forged the Zach's name, because Zach said, I'll get you the title. So she had forged his name on the title, and she got brought up on misdemeanor charges because she didn't have a power of attorney for Zach and the father. So we ended up having to get the title clerk out of a problem, and we got that sentence suspended for a year. So all was well and a happy ending. But had we not known where to go, the dealership would have probably had to pay the $26,500 or paid a lot of money in lawyers' fees, and it would have been very costly. It would have been a problem. So in this case, I won one for the good guys, me and Captain America. You'll feel better once you understand your insurance policy. It's something that is complicated and convoluted, but once you start looking and you start asking what if questions, and I'd encourage you to think again when if you're having a sleepless night, or you're worried about something, how would you handle it? What if we had an auto accident? One exercise that I ask all the dealers to do, and I'll ask you to do this as well, is just take a minute and take the value of the land and building of your dealership. Add to that your used car inventory, add to that your parts inventory, and then your blue sky. So, or how much you would get, the multiple you would get if you sell the dealership. If you add all that up together, generally speaking, for single point dealerships, you're talking about between $15 and $20 million. Well, if you don't have umbrella coverage up to that $15 or $20 million, and your parts driver hits somebody and severely injures them, then you put your enterprise at risk because you don't have enough umbrella coverage to cover that type of accident. So when you ask, what if this happened? What if my parts driver T-boned a car or hit a school bus full of kids? What would happen? How would my insurance respond? And do I have enough insurance? And so once you begin to ask yourself these questions, you will feel better. The sun will come out as opposed to the dark, stormy slide that I had earlier. You'll feel better because you'll understand that the dealership will be covered. I'm not saying it's going to be a comfortable situation because, of course, when you have a catastrophic loss, it's always uncomfortable. But you'll feel better knowing that you have an insurance policy that may help you. So now off to risk transference. And remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A section, and I'll be happy to answer them. So risk transference. So the first methodology of risk transference is insurance policies, which is what we've been talking about. The second is procedures. So going back to the slide with the runner that was a little messed up, how can you booby trap the dealership to make sure that problems are bubbling to the right person so that they can make informed and quick decisions? Or how can you install a new procedure in the store? Jay Burgess asked, can you get a copy of the deck after? Yes, and I'll give you my contact information when we're done. How can you install a procedure to make sure that customer problems are handled earlier? We talked about reviews as an example. So if you don't have somebody in the store who is monitoring those reviews, start that. Have those go to somebody who can answer them, and make sure that they're answering them. Make sure somebody's getting them back into the store, and make sure somebody is satisfying the customer. If you're concerned that they're going to spend too much money, give them a limit. Putting any kind of procedures in place. It could be in the service department, the parts department, the sales department, F&I, wherever it might be. And then training. Are you training your employees? And importantly, when you're talking about training, and I advocate for at least a monthly training, on any specific topic that you can choose. But when you do train your employees, have them sign off an acknowledgement form and make sure that goes into their employee folder. The reason you want to do that is if you ever have a regulator come in, the CFPB or the FTC, if they come in and they really want to get upset with you and say, we're really upset, you guys shouldn't do this stuff, you should be able to go to your trainings and pull them out of your personnel folders and say, hey, listen, I understand that Mrs. Jones is upset about this item, but we go through training every month. And in fact, we trained on this particular topic on this date. And here's the training. And it shows them that you're not being willfully non-compliant. And willful non-compliance means you don't have a compliance program, of which we're going to talk about here in just a couple minutes. You don't have a compliance program and you don't care. So if you don't have a robust compliance program you can show you, you put yourself more at risk than if you can say, hey, here's our training and here's what we do and we take this seriously and that kind of thing. So risk transference on insurance policies. What policies can we buy to protect the dealer? Spoke to a dealer this morning and asked if he had pollution coverage. He said, I never considered it. Why would I need pollution coverage? I said, well, if you have an oil spill, if anything leaks that's hazardous around the dealership, or if any of your vendors throw the used oil or the used antifreeze or any of those materials that can be detrimental to the environment, if they don't dispose of them properly, are you covered as the dealership? So number one, can you buy any insurance policies? And number two, can we negotiate with them to add language that will address your specific needs? So this is the first thing on transference. Second thing, here's an example of some procedures. Number one, do you use customer releases for issues when you spend money that you shouldn't have to? So do you have the customer sign off on something that says, I agree that the dealership is giving me 4 tires and I won't come back to them for more? That's a procedure you can put in place so that you don't have one customer continually coming back to you and asking you for things over and over. Because then you say, hey, we agreed that this was the last thing I was going to give you for a freebie. You're still important to me. I still care about you. I can give you a discount on your service or whatever you want to do, but so that they're not abusing you. Do you have a media policy? What would you do, and do your employees know what to do if the local camera crew rolls up and wants to start filming someone? Does everyone know what to do there? Does someone look at your F&I procedures on an ongoing basis to make sure that your F&I managers are doing the right things? Having somebody audit your deals is super important for detecting problems. And that's part of risk, is the detection of the problem and then the correction of the problem. And then open recalls on used vehicles. There's no laws yet that you have to do, unless it's your own brand. Like if you're a Chevrolet dealer, you have to do the open recalls before you can sell a used Chevrolet. But are there open recalls on your used vehicles? If you're not sending them down the street to get those, if it's not your nameplate, if you're not sending them down the street to get those fixed, you open yourself up to liability. It's a free repair. You can see how it would go in court. So Mr. Klein, you didn't want to take the time to get the free repair done down the street to ensure your next customer who you sold this car to would have a safe car, right? These are some procedures you can put in place to make sure that you don't have a problem. Monthly training we talked about, and the very important employee sign-off acknowledgement. Compliance. Compliance, the 7 pillars of compliance. Implementing policies, procedures, and standards of conduct. What do you expect from everyone? Does everyone know what they're supposed to do? Designating a compliance officer. I've spoken recently with 3 very large groups, one of 17 stores, one of 20 stores, and one of 29 stores, and said, do you have a compliance officer in each store who reports problems up through the chain of command. And I'm finding that a lot of larger organizations don't have that. But even at a smaller store, even at a single point store, even at three rooftops, do you have a compliance officer? Is there someone who's in charge of making sure that all these policies and procedures are being followed? Training and education, we've talked about. Effective communication. If there's a problem, do they know who they're supposed to go to? Are they monitoring and auditing? In other words, are they going back to our circle from the beginning with the arrows? Are they trying to unearth these problems? Are they looking for ways to protect the dealer, right? Because part of compliance is safeguarding the dealer. We want to make sure to protect the dealer and their assets. If someone breaks the compliance policies and procedures, are there disciplinary guidelines? Some things are set in stone, right? Maybe stealing is one that immediately firing, but maybe misleading a customer might not be. That's up to you and your internal policy. But if you mislead a customer, how's that going to be handled? And are you detecting offenses and taking corrective action? A big one also is, are you using correction notices? Written correction notices are a great tool to stop a problem in its tracks. So number one, it'll help you with an employee who's not doing what they're supposed to. But number two, if you end up firing that employee, if you have written correction notices, it reduces the chances they're going to come back and say, hey, I don't know why you fired me, and you fired me for no reason at all, and they start making things up. If you have written correction notices, that's part of the corrective action, and I certainly encourage that. And if that's not enough, Chapter 8 of the United States Sentencing of Organizations. So this is the criminal code that judges use in order to sentence offenders. So some items at the dealership are actually criminal if they're not done properly. For example, if you don't have a robust IRS 8300 cash reporting mechanism or system, the penalties for that are up to 5.5 million, I believe, and up to 5 years in jail. So one of the questions that a judge would ask, there are two factors that mitigate punishment. One is the existence of an effective compliance program and what your cooperation level and acceptance are. So if you don't have a compliance program, I would say now is the time to stop and think about installing one and start this afternoon. There really is no reason to not have one, to not work on that every month. This is something you have to chip away at. This isn't just something that you're going to wave a magic wand and all of a sudden have a compliance program, but you really should consider stopping and doing that now. And you'll feel a lot better once you do. So we're going to talk briefly about a few things that you should consider in your compliance program. The Home Solicitation Act has been around for years. I believe it was originally conceived because of vacuum cleaner salesmen. The Home Solicitation Act now applies to us because we're now going to people's homes and negotiating car deals at their home. Now you can check with legal counsel on this, but, and I've talked to a lot of lawyers about this, but if we're going to someone's home and we're negotiating with them or signing paperwork with them, then you should be giving them the 3-day right of rescission. The penalties for not doing this right is that the customer can come back at any later date and ask for all their money back. I can't go into all the specifics with the Home Solicitation Act here now, but the penalties are severe. And so from a risk perspective, you say, am I willing to pay that if it ever comes up, or do I want to comply, give the customer their notices that they have 3 days to rescind the deal and move on? So put that one on your, consider putting that one on your list to take a look at. IRS 8300 compliance, we just talked about briefly. What is cash? and how to receipt. So I often go into dealerships and they're not receipting what's coming in correctly. So if it's a debit card, it should say on the receipt debit card. If it's a cashier's check, it should say cashier's check. If it's a traveler's check, traveler's check. And that way, the billing department, when they check behind the cashier, can actually total the cash and make sure if there's more than $10,000, and this is a complicated law, but to put it in its simplest form, if there's more than $10,000, they know how to receipt it. They can tell from looking at the cash receipts what the contents of those receipts are, whether it was a personal check, if it was a lien holder check or a traveler's check or a cashier's check. So start by taking a look at your receipts. If your receipts aren't specific enough, then I can tell you you're missing 8,300 reports, and the penalties for that, for a willful non-compliance, I think is $250,000 per report. But if you just miss one, it's $50. So IRS 8,300 compliance. Advertising. I can go on almost any dealer's website and find advertising violations. The last two dealerships I looked at, I took a look at one car, and one I think I found 12 violations, and the other I found 14 violations. This is a big area of compliance that that we could pay more attention to in our industry. The FTC has just proposed new advertising rules, of which there's a lot of conversation about whether that will get passed or not. It is coming. More regulation here is coming. The FTC has been very, very active over the last 120 days. Jarrett asked, if you go to their house for a re-sign an already delivered unit, do they have a 3-day right of rescission? The lawyers I've talked to, Jarrett, say that if you're negotiating at their house, then you're having sales activity at the house, and the sales activity is the trigger. Feel free to call me afterwards and we can talk more about it. Back to advertising. So the biggest mistake I see in this particular case, you see 45,367 is the sales price. There's no asterisks. And when you have no asterisks, according to the NADA, and I'll show you that in a second, the processing fee, the taxes and tags are considered included. So if you don't have an asterisk that brings the customer down to a disclaimer, then it's considered that is included in the price. And if you sell 200 cars a month times an average of processing fee and tags, let's just say $3,000, right? That's $60,000 for a month. And then for class action status, you can do the multiplication and see how big those numbers get. So make sure that the asterisk or any other symbol you want to use ties down to the disclaimer at the bottom of the page. Otherwise, the argument goes that the customer doesn't know that there's anything else. How do they know that there's something at the bottom of the page? So, so that's important here. I also use the word plus, don't use the word and is a little more ambiguous, and don't be vague. This particular one says internet prices may include rebates and incentives, which may include private offers, conquest offers, loyalty offers, and may apply to those who qualify for. That's very vague, and any regulator or any lawyer would say that your practices here are deceptive. So be very specific when it comes to advertising. Here's the NADA advertising guidance that I mentioned. It is reasonable to conclude that certain government-imposed fees, for example, taxes and license fees, may be excluded from this amount as long as it is clearly and conspicuously disclosed in the advertisement that the consumer will need to pay such items in addition to the advertised price. So the standard is clear and conspicuous on these advertising laws. This is pulled right out of there's a 94-page book for NADA advertising guidance that you can get directly from them. We talked about a compliance management system. Folks, this is mandated by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This isn't this isn't optional. I suggest something as simple as a 3-ring binder, but as I mentioned, there are software programs that will that you can collate this data and upload all of it so you have it at one place. Cindy asked me if I have a line under the price that says details. When they click on details, a pop-up screen has the disclosures. Will this be okay? I would like it if it was in a brighter color, or if it was somehow distinguished so we could say it was clear and conspicuous. But I'm happy to take a look at it with you afterwards. But you have to take a look at the size of the type, and would somebody who has a sight problem be able to see it? I would say that was probably be one of the ways I would answer that question. So back to the binders. So keeping your keeping your customer problems and the resolutions in one place is a great tool. If a regulator ever comes in and says, hey, what are you doing to solve customer problems? And you can hand them a binder. It's a super way to slow them down. Compliance, class action lawsuit, and class action exposure. Do the employees waive their right to class action exposure in your guidebook? That's one way to reduce exposure. Is there a class action waiver on consumer documents? Making sure that, and there's a lot of ways to do that. The one way that it depends, and this is different for each state, but one thing I recommend is both the dealership as well as the customer waive their right to a class action. So it's mutual. There's no arguments about what's called a contract of adhesion. It's a legal term to say that the contract was so one-sided and so unconscionable that the whole thing should be thrown out. And that's an argument that a lot of lawyers use. Are you sending out Fair Credit Reporting Act letters? So the dealership, because in the truth in lending disclosure on the upper right corner where it says lien holder, the dealership's name is listed as the lien holder. So if you're not financing the customer, if you're not doing a buy here, pay here for the customer, you're required to send out a Fair Credit Reporting Act letter stating that you are not financing the customer. Otherwise, there are treble damages and all kinds of penalties and class action exposure. So if you're not doing that, that is a big risk and something that would demand your immediate attention now. A real quick, another case study. A client, and this is one example, handed me a 362-page policy. I asked 107 questions, which resulted in 26 adjustments, saved that particular client $29,000 a year. And then we bought back some limits, upgrading some of the lower limits they had. So it's tedious, folks, but consider reading your policy. Ask the questions of the insurance agent, the insurance company. Make sure you know what is in that policy so you know how to respond to some problems. That's pretty good, right? So overall philosophy: review, audit, correct, and repeat. You should look at everything in the dealership. You should look at the advertising. You should look in the F&I department and their practices. Your insurance policies. We talked about pollution. Consider directors and officers insurance. There are a lot of reasons why the definitions in directors and officers insurance are very broad and covers a wide array of problems, subpoenas, administrative actions, not necessarily just lawsuits that may be picked up under your garage policy. Consider cyber insurance, especially with the new Graham-Leach-Bliley Act that's starting on December 9th. You're required to be in compliance. There are new regulations. So you know, if you haven't started that, that's something also that requires your attention now. Take a look at the customer paperwork. See if there's a way to make the customer paperwork work in your favor. One of the things that we did is we actually set something in there that said, before you go see a lawyer, you're required to meet with me so that I could try to resolve the problem. So how can you be creative in your paperwork to stop problems before they happen? How can you be inventive? What can you do, again, to booby trap that situation? Customers only look at their paperwork when they have a problem. So that's what they're going to go to before they go to a lawyer. What can you put in your employee guidebook? What policies, what procedures? How can you make sure that the proper training materials are in that guidebook and that everybody signs off on it, that the employees are properly onboarded? How can you do that? Responding to online reviews, we talked about once or twice monthly training. And I'd encourage you every month to pull 5 to 10 deals and just look at them, see what paperwork is in there. F&I managers love to make up forms. I don't know what it is in the F&I manager, but you'll sometimes open up a deal and the F&I manager will create a new checklist, and it'll not be something that you would want to stand in front of a judge or a jury or a regulator and have to defend. So take a look what's inside those deals. It may surprise you what you find. So back to the overall philosophy: remediate the problems and correct them. Document that you had a problem and that you corrected it. Report up through your chain of command. The documentation, again, can be a 3-ring binder. It can be an email, however you want to keep them in case a regulator comes into your business and wants to get into your business. You can say, hey, we have a robust program. We document our mistakes. We then report them up through our chain of command. And then we evaluate and revise and see how that goes. And then we do it all over again. So with that, it's been about 45 minutes. If you have any questions, I am certainly happy to answer them at this point. I'd like to make sure that we have time at the end, but if not, this will be posted on NCM's website. It'll be posted on Better Vantage Point's YouTube channel. You can certainly get the deck from NCM or from me. Here is my contact information. I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes and see if anything else comes up. But that's, in short, how you stop everyone from reaching into your pocket. Make sure you have a robust compliance program. Make sure you think about those what ifs and what if. Sit down for a few minutes early in the morning when you're fresh and try to think about what problems might bubble up into your office. Mary asked, I'd like some more examples of booby trapping so problems bubble up to me. Typically, I'm the last one. No. One example, I think employees are reluctant to bring problems, Mary. I had one employee who just wouldn't bring me a problem. I ended up bribing her $50 for her to bring me a problem. That's one that is a little counterintuitive, but that's one that comes off the top of my head. The second thing is, if you don't do an expense analysis at the end of the month, any customer any time the dealership pays over a certain amount of money. So for example, if you would want to know any time that somebody authorized more than $500 or $1,000 for a customer problem, that's a customer problem you're going to want to know about, because it may be a failure in process or it may be a failure of personnel is the reason that that's happening. So if you have a bad apple in the sales department, for example, and they keep promising tinting or they keep promising better wheels or better tires or whatever it is, and in order to satisfy the customer, the sales manager keeps spending money to do that, then that's something you'll want to know about. Other examples are, you would want to know certain reviews that are bad, certain CSI problems. If anybody gives you a 1 or a 0 on a CSI score, make sure that your procedure is that the service manager or or the parts man or whoever got the bad CSI is putting a copy of that on your desk so you can find out what the root problem is. So by reporting these things in this way, the problems should bubble to you a little more quickly. I hope that answers your question. Other questions, other concerns. I'm certainly available. You can certainly call me after or email me. My phone number, my email address are both on the screen. Here's one more question. One more answer. Thank you, Mary. If there isn't anything else, then we're going to bring this to a close. And my name is Tom Klein. Again, I appreciate you participating with us today. And thanks for seeing things from a better vantage point. Again, if you want a copy of the deck, please reach out and I'm happy to send it. Take good care and have a good day.